Well, good morning. I know many of you in the room, and it's good to be amongst friends. I also want you to know that I've got a misspent youth. I don't look very young, but I've got a misspent youth with Pete Lom and Mark Fitch and Ron Sharon and ADEQ and Rita Bates and the New Mexico contingent. And so as we get into this, I think it's important to kind of understand the audience. So from my personal knowledge of who you are, and I know, like I said, I know many of you, but those of you that are with Fish and Wildlife Service, raise your hands. I can see kind of okay. National Park Service? Okay, Brent, you're the lone ranger, huh? State organizations, okay, and I count myself in there. Forest Service, wow, large Forest Service contingent. We've got state BLM, yeah, BLM, okay. Now, I'll give Claudia another chance to raise her hand again. Air quality or smoke regulators. There's Rita. Welcome, Rita. We got a cross section, but this is the first time that this gathering has been open to the public, and we had a few publics here yesterday. It's the first time ever that I can remember inviting the publics into a meeting or a consortium like this. And I applaud and give a lot of credit to those that had the vision and the courage to invite the publics. And do we have anybody from the public here this morning? Did we scare them off yesterday? I don't know. So with that, I see Jake Nuttall back there in the back, and he knows me well enough to keep an eye on that door back there, and if there's any question about someone coming through there that you think might be public, you give me the steel third sign, okay? All right. The other group, and I looked at Brent, weather people. We've got Brent, you're the only one in here, and I appreciate the fact that on a Saturday that you would come, interested enough to come and participate. So we've been here for a couple of days, a couple of fairly intense days, and as I looked at what I had to do, and I'd never met Holly before, and she's the rising generation on the Kaibab, and I spent some time on the Kaibab in Coconino, and I'd never met her, which is interesting, that this new rising generation that we've got, and many of you are here representing that contingent. So we get to Saturday morning, and I feel like we've just about PowerPointed you to death. We've just about killed you by PowerPoint. And so I'm just gonna visit with you and talk to you about observations, my observations this week in listening to what was presented. And my observations necessarily are a little bit random, but the random nature and the spontaneous nature of prescribed fire smoke management is a reality. When it's time, it's time. When conditions are right, when the prescription is met and ventilation is appropriate, it's time. And so as I get into this, I want you to know the lens that I look through. The lens that I look through today is about a 30 to 40 year career. Ecologically, that is not sufficient for any kind of judgmental statement at all. I also am associated with a young man in Canyon City, Colorado, and he calls me Pops. I'll let you and he has asthma. And I've seen that young man struggle for air to get his breath. So I'm going to be looking at what I observed through that lens a little bit too. Those of you that know me necessarily know that I have to look through the lens of a little bit of failure, what would be determined as failure maybe, but then also a little bit of success. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Now, necessarily, I want to ask you to entreat me and be patient with me here just a little bit. There's a reason, and I've made this statement to some of you. There's a reason that the windshield on your vehicle is much, much bigger than the rear view mirror. and my vehicle's no different than you. My personality is exactly that way. I think the rear view mirror has significance for reference. But then I think the thing we need to pay attention to is what's in front of us. We need to be looking through the windshield. We need to be watching and looking to the future. So also, as we get into my observations, there has to be a somewhat of a mental reference. And these mental references that we make, as I watched and observed the video that Ron shared with us yesterday, I realized that from the practitioner level, that there was some anxiety. It was maybe almost a direct confrontational assault on a deep conviction that you really feel strongly about. I share that strong feeling. But I want you to know that humanity as a whole holds those strong convictions, and it's tied to the full spectrum of these inner feelings, these inner emotions. And it's based on the very opposite ends of the spectrum, one being tragedy and the other being ecstasy. And as we think about those things, the one thing that makes this world go round is the fact that all of us are just a little bit different. There was a study that was presented where they were trying to identify with how much diversity or how we could assess a question. And this question was seated in two photos. One of a deep, dark boreal forest, and the other was way to the other end of the spectrum, was an open grass savanna with one large tree in it. And so, as diverse as we are in this room, or as much alike as we are in this room, it wouldn't be sufficient to really assess that. Now, I was pointed to this study by a landscape architect on the Coconino Forest. And that's a little out of the lane of landscape architecture, maybe, but maybe not. And so the groups that they chose to show these two photos to and record their reactions were Asians and Texans. Okay? Now, I don't know how much more diverse you could get. I honestly don't. But the results were this, that over 90% of them, and it was, what do you like? What do you prefer? What do you see? What do you see in this photo? And they didn't guide it any further than that. What kind of emotion, what do you see in this photo? Over 90% of them selected the open grass savanna with a single tree versus the deep, dark boreal forest. Now, then they took it to the psychologist for assessment. And there was varying degrees of what drove this assessment. these numbers that were there. And they came down to the fact that over time, humanity, worldwide humanity, has experienced success, and those positive feelings in the more visual, open setting versus the dark boreal forest. Now, I'll let you decide whether that's bunk or not. But it is something to consider. It is something to consider. As time goes on, I'm not sure that reality. I don't know what normal is anymore. I don't know what average is anymore. But I can tell you that we've gotten to a point where we really take a strong look at everything that everybody says. So in this full spectrum of emotions, on the tragedy end, and I hope you'll understand this a little bit, on the tragedy end, we deal with some cultural, some agency, and some personal demons. And on the other end, on the ecstasy end, we actually deal with those same groups, and we deal with some trusted mentors, people that have been significant line officers and agency administrators that have supported us, regulators that have helped us understand how to do our job better, and we've had what I call guardian angels close by, and I've had more than my share of them, and there's some sitting in this room. So based on that, as you approach these observations I'm going to give you, this last summer I was on a fire in Eastern Oregon, and a gentleman that has over 50 fire seasons, and he made this comment. We were talking about objectives, and he said this, and I almost adopted this as the overriding objective to everything we do. There is nothing so good that it can't be better. And there's nothing so bad that it can't get worse. That pretty well covers it. That pretty well covers it. So, as we sit in this room, and you heard me say that I had a grandson that had asthma, I'm pretty passionate about his health and well-being and those kind of things, especially when I see him struggling to breathe. But I will say this, that there should be no doubt after the last few days of the passion and the dedication of the practitioners and those people in this room that are doing their jobs, trying to do their jobs under difficult situations. And I'll be honest with you, there's a couple of things that I observed, and that was, and maybe some of you have heard this on occasion, well, let's leave that for the night shift. My observation is we are the night shift. The other one is that, well, I'll come back to that in a minute when I share some observations with you. But as we go along in this business, it is painfully obvious to me that you're not here just because it's a job. You have a passion for it, and you want to do a good job. And if there is one of those demons in the back of your mind, it's the fear of failure. Whatever failure looks like to you. As I sat by Dave Robinson and the numbers came up on the screen of the escape prescribed fires on the Kaibab, Coconino, I turned and looked at him and it was like 20%. You put that in numbers, Holly, and that means that 1 out of every 5 prescribed fires up there is going to be on the edge of escape or right in an escape. Yeah, public perception. Okay, so now the randomness that I'm going to share this with you is that we started out, and I'm going to start with the reason we're here, and you have to manage smoke. I agree with Rita. If you don't know how to do it, it's a combination of the science and then the art of how to carry it out. And I look at Brent, and then we got these weather guys. And these weather guys, I have heckled them for 40 years now. They are our best advocates, but they have to be comfortable with a success rate of about 30%, Brent? But they're okay with that, because when they're right, they're really, really right. But the fact of the matter is that they recognize that as weather being very dynamic. And then when you couple that with fire, then we've got a odd combination. And even though it might be a low frequency of failure, the consequences are, even when maybe something very, very terrible doesn't happen, the consequence is still a bad outcome, no matter what. So the other thing is that you bring together the science, acceptable risk, and then this commitment to act, this valor for the job that you do. And then I think one thing that we don't give ourselves enough credit for, and as I observed the room, is what I call deferring to common sense, using good common sense. I can remember a day in my career when if we went to do a burn and if the entire area wasn't black, it was a failure. That's not the way it is today. We don't have to black every acre. From the regulator standpoint, we know that it's about regional haze and public health. But we also know that the reason they regulate it, very simply, is because they can, and that's their job. They can, and that's their job. And so that's something that we have to commit to. I want to bring up the statement yesterday from the one lady that said, if you'll figure out how much biomass has grown in 100 years, and then tell me how much a tenth of that is. And as futile as that may seem to you, I want to admit that I worked on that very equation with Dr. Zimmerman in a previous life or day right here in the Southwest. But the problem is not how much biomass is growing, it's how much maintenance you've got to do. That's the problem. And as good as it would be for us to say that we could do something and be done with it, I don't think there's a person in this room that really has been through very much of your career to where you realize, well, I'm going to stick around until everything's burned. Good luck. I hope you find the fountain of youth. So, for you practitioners, this is an observation. You're here not because you're Copenhagen fire managers. What do I mean by that? I have observed that you get these practitioners out around a little smoke, and the first thing that they want to do is they want to have a little something in their lip. No, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about. Copenhagen fire management is the smokeless variety, and it doesn't work. It does not work. However, you have a bad outcome, and I have heard line officers and agency administrators, and do we have any in the room? Bill, you're about the only one. But when there's a bad outcome, I have heard this, quote, "Never again on my watch," end quote. Now, how condemning is that when you're the next agency administrator or line officer, or you're the next fuels person on that district, or then what you're handed, not on my watch, is compounded just by time. Observation for both practitioners and the public. And I will say that this is something that I borrowed from a colleague of mine. Quote, "When you send smoke signals, there is no spell check. However, the signature is very clear." And I'm going to go back to what Ron Sharon mentioned yesterday. We've got to avoid the temptation to say, "But that's not my smoke." You know what? When there's 4 or 5 or 6 burns going, it don't matter. It don't matter. It's all our smoke, and we're all in this together. And we need to own, coordinate, collaborate, and manage all smoke. It's our smoke. This also for the public and the practitioner, after being on a fire near Fort Apache, and a tribal chairman who also had a son that had to be evacuated, airlifted because of asthma, because of that fire that day, and then penned a letter to the regulators, and quote unquote, this went in that letter: "We will no longer allow an existing filthy airshed to hold our sacred trust lands hostage to wood smoke issues." Those are pretty strong words. And this was right after the Rodeo Chetaskai fire, so you can imagine how strongly they felt about losing or incurring more damaging fire on their sacred lands. Now, about 4 or 5 years ago, I sat in Tucson, and some of you may have been there, when a representative from the University of Arizona showed a study. And here's the way the Southwest kind of crops up and looks to me. In between, and I think that your perception would be the same. As you travel from Albuquerque to Flagstaff, there are places that you would say somewhere out there just west of Albuquerque here, fairly easy to manage the fuels, isn't it? And then you get to Mount Taylor. And then you get to lava beds, Malpai. And then as you go along, you hit Flagstaff and you hit the San Francisco Peaks. And you go south or north, go any direction you want, and it doesn't take very long from these volcanic mountains that are up at 10 to 14,000 feet. And all of a sudden, in a rapid way, you're in a desert, or a high desert, what I call high desert. If the lowest decomposition rate is in the desert, then maybe the second or third slowest decomposition rate is on Mount Taylor, San Francisco Peaks, Mount Graham. Jemez Mountains, Angel Fire. You know, and what it takes is it takes moisture for decomposition. So we've got a challenge there, how we deal with that biomass. The other thing an observation that I had was, and not only from the public, but, and this is for the practitioner, I detected quite a bit of frustration. And I will tell you this, the other thing that I wanted to share there with Leave It for the Night Shift, I will tell you that all the easy acres have been treated. They've been burned. And so now you've got the worst, you've got the most difficult, you've got the most challenging, and then the easy acres that were done before are going to come back into the maintenance door, and that's a challenge too. I already talked a little bit about risk. There is no way, and you heard it yesterday, observation, quote, there is no way to reduce risk to zero. But we have to be able to identify acceptable risk. Have to be able to live with it. Acceptable risk. The public, that person in that picture number 5 back there, that built that house right on the edge, so secluded by those trees, has a responsibility to think about acceptable risk. And we have a responsibility to think about acceptable risk if we were to choose to treat and prescribe fire that area. I will also tell you that in or about 1985, I was in Southern California on what I thought was the largest fire that I'd ever be on. It was called the Wheeler Fire. It was 187,000 acres. And I thought, I'll never be on a bigger fire than that. And right now in the Southwest, we've had fires that shadow that terribly. The Mogollon Rim, referenced as the largest contiguous ponderosa pine forest in the world. And in Tucson, this study that was displayed said that by 2025, that 1/2 to 2/3 of the ponderosa pine on the Mogollon Rim would be gone. And I looked at it and went, no way. No way. This is after the Rodeo Chetasky. And then you can imagine the fires after the Willow, the Wallow. It just marches on and on. Whitewater Baldy. And if my calculations are even close, we're up near 2 million acres of fire on the Mogollon Rim in the last decade. And I'm not saying that all that fire was bad. I'm saying that there were some positive ecological effects from that. So, for the public and the practitioner, observation. The 200-year event is impossible to prepare for or defend. We've got to do the best we can and keep moving. As we, for the public, I think the one thing that we need to really keep in mind as practitioners is we have a responsibility to listen. And then I'm going to say this. I've been on the end of the phone, as Ron Sharon has, and been verbally abused by the public. Number one, this is no time for emotion or heroism when things are as daunting as they are. Just last week, the Cronkite News published an article that says that the future weather trends look daunting for the Southwest and Western United States, and that fires will at least be at 50% larger and possibly 100% larger in acres than they have been. That doesn't feel good. So as we listen, We have an obligation to listen, but we need to be professional and careful in our communication, because that communication can tear down fences as easy as a failure can. For the practitioner, we have a responsibility to listen, and I ask you the question, have we gotten to a point where, and with the regulators, have we gotten to a point that we are over-focused on the vocal minority? I know this video came and it was heartfelt. It was heartfelt. But are we overreacting or over-responding to vocal minority? Public consensus. I'm not real comfortable with where we are with the greater good, or for the greater need, for the greater numbers. And it's challenging. For you practitioners, one of the observations that in conversations is there's never been a time like now where you need to be and need to establish the cornerstone of trust with your agency administrators and line officers. And that cornerstone of trust, they have to trust you when you step out there with the drip torch, and you have to trust them that they're gonna support you. And that trust comes from experience and confidence. The other perception that I think that maybe hasn't been said enough is we pay a lot of money to you to obtain that experience and have and share your professional experience. Now, some people have referred to it as an opinion. I don't know that anybody's really entitled to an opinion. But we're certainly entitled, and we pay you to share your experience. You know, I kind of took a pot shot at Brent and weather guys, but they're vital to our success. And yet, on the other hand, if you're a practitioner in this room and you've got a responsibility to manage smoke and to manage prescribed fire, and you think that 30% is okay or 50% is okay, that's not the reason you're in the room, and I know that. And I think the public needs to understand that. You're not here to play Russian roulette with a drip torch. You're here to be professional and do the very best you can under the conditions and circumstances that you've been placed. Now, after the video yesterday, I wrote in my notes, and you'll have a heyday with this, and I wrote this to me after that video. You murdering, drip torch carrying Neanderthal. I have resembled that remark on occasion. Redebates, I have. There's something that comes from our obsession to carry a drip torch. We love being on the ignition, on the ignitions. And then someone said, we're going to switch over to holding. Oh, you know, really? And then I look at these young information officers that are coming up. Holly, we don't have enough people that have the valor for being out there, right there in Tusayan, with that smoke right in town, and going to that bus of Korean visitors to the canyon, because we've got too many that go, let me carry the drip torch. Just let me carry the drip torch. I don't want to talk to the public. And then who's out there watching where the smoke's going? We know we know where it's coming from, but where's it going? We know the frequency of fire in ponderosa pines, well documented. We know the frequency of fire in all other ecosystems too. And I'll tell you, I've never met an agency administrator yet who had the magic to change that. That is a tapestry that's cast in concrete. The fire return interval and frequency and the way fire burns in an ecosystem is what it is. And it will manifest itself. I'll close by saying that I think that one of the things that challenges is, and you may remember this, but Charles Schulz, that wrote the Peanuts comic strip, and in one of the holiday efforts that they put out, Peanuts and the group are out there playing baseball, and high fly gets hit out there, and Lucy is the one that's going to catch it. Some of you may remember this. And everybody, you know, it's a high fly. So by the time Lucy gets ready to catch the ball, all of her teammates are standing right there around her. But none of them step in there. None of them step in there, and probably are a little, you know, intimidated by Lucy a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, it has nothing to do with gender. It has to do with a fly ball, and it has to do with distractions. And so Lucy concentrating on the ball, and the ball's coming down, and she drops it. And you can hear all the friends, oh, just a sigh, okay? And then Lucy says this, how do you expect me to catch the ball when I have to worry about my country's foreign policy? Now, you can say what you want, but we can all make excuses. We can all make excuses. And when it comes right down to it, let's make sure that we're listening, doing the best we can, that we're listening, that we're seeking understanding, that we admit that there's differences, that we admit that there are people out there that they don't care what you've got to do or what you're paid to do. They just want you to stop. But then if we realize and listen, communicate, we hit that really hard, then I hope that we go out the door and strive. Now, strive is a different word than try. Strive for a future of small and significant successes. You know, the high fly ball or standing in the batter's box to hit not a home run, but a grand slam may be the worst strategy you could have. But if you stand in the batter's box to hit the ball to get on base, small success contributes to a win-win for everybody. And it may be that we shut down a burn when we realize that it's not the right day, right time, right place. That's a win, that you've gotten on base and you're going to be supported. So I'll say that again. I hope we can strive for a future of small and significant successes. Don't overload your wagon. It's no time for heroics with the weather that's in front of us. And the last thing I'd say is, but it's no time for the no action alternative. We've got a job to do.